Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Ruckus, our weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly, and our topics this week: a Kansas congressional race produces a Davids, but no Goliaths. On the Missouri ballot, Amendment 1, one of many, and Tuesday's election results through Steve's rose-colored glasses, plus roast and toast. But we open with our interview segment and begin our discussion of the major races in the bi-state area. And joining me is nationally known author and journalist David Von Drehle. David now writes a twice-weekly column for the Washington Post dealing with national affairs and politics. And best of all, he resides in the metro area and, like the rest of us, will be living with whatever results, good or bad, next week's elections bring. David Von Drehle, welcome back to Ruckus. Thanks very much for coming in.
Great to be here, Mike.
You write about politics, but not just about politics. So let me ask you about the national mood. What do you think it is as we get ready to vote next Tuesday? Anger, joy, disdain, pleasure?
Maybe all of the above. It seems a little short on joy this year. There's a lot of anger on both sides. We're just learning, I think, about the effects of digital social media on the mood of a democratic nation with free expression. There are people that are making businesses out of anger and projecting anger and focusing it. And the people that I meet are mostly baffled by this, bewildered by this. They're asking what's happened to us, why is this happening? I'm not sure more people are angry, but the angry people are much louder.
In fact, you write about that in a column that appears this morning, that is Thursday morning in the Kansas City Star. In another column recently, you wrote, America would be a calmer, saner place if we had a lot more congressional districts like the one I live in, the Kansas 3rd. Why so?
Because it's a moderate district in which Democrats and Republicans both can win under given circumstances. As you know, certainly, the recent history of the Kansas 3rd has been pretty evenly divided between moderate Democrat Dennis Moore and now a Republican that is certainly moderate in style and in tone and approach, Kevin Yoder. And he's now in a tight race with Sharice Davids, can go back to the Democrats. I think these races where the district does not belong to one party or the other creates a more moderate tone, and we could do with more of it.
The one debate between Yoder and Davids is going to be appearing this evening on KCPT at 7:30, right after the Ruckus broadcast. You think it's fair to say that Donald Trump is the main topic in most all of these congressional elections?
Absolutely. There's never been a president that I've covered, and I go back to Carter, first president I wrote about, who has been so able to drive and compel the news cycle and the attention of the public. Every one of those presidents has dreamed of being able to determine the news cycle the way President Trump does. But Trump, using the social media with his mastery of Twitter and his, I guess I'd call it shameless willingness to say outrageous things, is able to focus almost everybody's attention.
He is good at self-promotion.
He is.
Let me ask you about some of the area races quickly.
Sure.
In the 3rd District, Davids and Yoder, how do you see that turning out?
It appears that Sharice Davids is in command of that race. The Republicans have stopped spending party money for Congressman Yoder, and that is purely a function of suburban reaction against Trump.
3 candidates, major candidates running for governor in Kansas. Do you give the nod to Laura Kelly?
I think that is a really close race. The polls suggest that Laura Kelly is up narrowly. The X factor there is the independent Greg Orman and how well he does and where his votes come from. I think he may draw more Republicans away from Kobach than people are giving credit for.
And finally, in Missouri, the Senate race, incumbent Claire McCaskill, 3 decades or more in Missouri politics, and the law professor turned Attorney General Josh Hawley.
That is one of the tightest races, if not the tightest race in the country. Claire McCaskill has got a very big challenge against a pretty competent candidate in a state that has definitely trended away from her over her 12-year term in the Senate. However, no smart person would ever bet against Claire McCaskill in a political race. She's a great politician.
And she's causing some controversy in her own party by commercials saying she's not one of the crazy Democrats.
Yeah, I think the reason I would give Hawley a narrow advantage in that race is that Democrats are not passionate about or passionate Democrats are not passionate about Claire McCaskill. And so she needs strong turnout in Kansas City and St. Louis, and I don't really know what's going to drive that turnout.
David, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming in. We'll watch for your columns in the Star and elsewhere.
Thank you, Mike.
That is Washington Post columnist and Kansas Cityan David Von Drehle. Now let's meet the panel and start a ruckus. Jason Grill is the founder of J. Grill Media and a senior advisor at Paris Communications. Gwen Grant is president and CEO of the Urban League in Kansas City. Ron Freeman's a motivational speaker and writer. And Crosby Kemper III is executive director of the Kansas City Library System and host of KCPT's Meet the Past and Centropolis programs. A lot to talk about today. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for coming in. Pollsters and politicos are predicting victory for a first-time candidate for the U.S. House. There seems to be growing confidence that attorney Sharice Davids, virtually unknown to Democratic voters until a few short months ago, will defeat incumbent Republican Kevin Yoder in the Kansas 3rd District. Keeping in mind that nothing is certain until all the votes are actually counted, if Davids wins, what are some of the key factors behind that victory? And we'll start with Jason.
I think for the most part, we'd all would agree it's 2 words, Donald Trump. I mean, this is a movement. It's all about Donald Trump. This election's been all about Donald Trump. I don't think many people dislike Kevin Yoder as a person. I think that he's a good person. I've always gotten along with him. I think it's more about timing in politics, and I think he actually has an opponent who can who fits the mold for this election cycle. And again, it's all about Donald Trump. Everyone's talking about Donald Trump. You know, we're not even really talking about Sharice Davids in this campaign. She's talking about Donald Trump. So I think it's just a bad election year for Kevin Yoder.
If what Jason says is right, is there anything Yoder can do to diminish the Trump effect?
Yeah, you know, it's a funny thing because Trump wasn't going to win the election in the first place, so how that's going to break, I'm not sure. But that's the challenge. It's been labeled as a negative to be associated with the president, who's actually leading us, and our country's going in a good direction. But, you know, I don't know. I think he's going to win it at the end, but I don't know how much the Trump effect will hurt him.
Well, we can say with certainty there have not been many debates between Sharice Davids and Kevin Yoder, only one, and it was on Facebook, but it's going to air this evening on KCPT, 7:30, right after the Ruckus program. So if lots of people watch this debate, Crosby, do you think it may have some effect on how people vote?
You know, it might have some, but you know, but Kevin Yoder's problem is that he hasn't defined Kevin Yoder. And after having been a congressman for as long as he's been a congressman, that's a serious problem. He's let not only Donald Trump, but Chris Kobach and Sam Brownback define this race. So he hasn't been able to clear the hurdle of the Kansas Republican problem, because it's, you know, and we may get into this later, but it's not just Kevin Yoder that's in trouble from a Republican point of view in Kansas. And it has a lot to do with the Brownback tax cut. It has a lot to do with Chris Kobach being kind of mono-focused on 2 issues. And so I think the problem, and I think I've read part of the debate, and I don't believe that Kevin comes out of it having done that.
trying to be fair, I think it is safe to say neither candidate actually answers any question in the debate. I watched a few minutes of it on Facebook, but again, you can watch it all at 7:30 tonight. So, speaking of Sharice Davids, Gwen, has she spelled out her objectives very well? Do we know what she stands for, what she wants?
Well, she stands for certainly protecting the Affordable Care Act and ensuring that people with pre-existing conditions receive, medical insurance. I think that the key here is, folks want to say they don't really know what she's about. Well, I think she's about an alternative to Kevin Yoder, who has been pretty much nothing more than Donald Trump. And I agree with Crosby that Kevin really has not found a place to anchor himself in this 3rd district in Kansas. And the significant thing about the 3rd district in Kansas is that it is a district that is more central, a more moderate district than to the far right or the far left. Mm-hmm. And Sharice Davids has aligned herself in the middle quite well, and that's why she's leading in this race.
He has been kind of bipartisan. I mean, I'll say he has been kind of bipartisan. I know he works with Cleaver, Representative Cleaver on a lot. And also, I think if John Kasich was president of the United States right now, I don't think Yoder would be in a tough race. I think if there was a moderate Republican president, we wouldn't even have an election right now. That was very competitive.
Yoder's a 4-term moderate, and he's not a hard right conservative. Everybody knows that, and he does a good job.
Really
so it's interesting.
He flip-flops on these issues based on how the
Sharice Davids.
Yeah,
I mean, Sharice Davids, you talked about the ACA. Sharice Davids has said that she might be in favor of a single-payer health care system, but she might not be. She'd have to take a look at it. I mean, she hasn't really taken a position on any issue.
Right.
She's doing a good job running her campaign politically.
Right.
According to the polling, she's doing great.
I think she'll win.
Yeah,
I think
so
she'll win,
apparently her message is strong enough.
So Ron, Yoder is criticized for supporting Trump policies 92% of the time. Don't we think Republican members of Congress generally are there to support Republican presidents' policies and vice versa?
Normally, but I think the reality is the policies have been effective. Our country's moving in the right direction. And
so that's a reason to oppose Yoder?
No, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't make any sense. It's like we've got this I hate Donald Trump, which has been a kind of a media straw man.
Isn't it Donald Trump's fault, though? I mean, as he's been saying all this week, this is about me, this is about me, this is about me.
But the problem
it's not about the economy.
The real problem we have on Capitol Hill is that the people we elect to represent us should go there to represent the electorate, the American people, and not to serve the president, but to serve this country. And they don't do that. That's why we have the problem we have right now.
The real problem, Gwen, is we're out of time for this segment.
Good point, Daniel.
Question, do you know any nonpartisan demographers, or even partisan ones? If Missouri Amendment 1, called Clean Missouri by its supporters, wins approval from voters next Tuesday, demographers, partisan and otherwise, will become more prominent. One of the several provisions of the amendment would establish a process where a nonpartisan demographer, someone who studies populations, their size, structure, and distribution, will redraw the districts from which Missourians elect members to the State House and Senate. Now, there's much more to the amendment, but let's start there. Is this something that you're backing, Gwen?
Absolutely. Yes, I think it's important that we have a nonpartisan demographer to redraw the lines after the census. Having a nonpartisan demographer really creates an opportunity to ensure that we have more balance and representation at the state. And it's important to also know that the current system where we have a House Apportionment Commission and a Senate Apportionment Commission, those two commissions will remain in place. The addition will be that the nonpartisan demographer will draw the lines in compliance with the Voting Rights Act to ensure that majority-minority districts are maintained to protect the right of people of color to elect a representative of their choice. And so this is a great move for Missouri.
All right, Crosby, is this just something that's going to make elections fairer?
The notion of the nonpartisan demographer is a kind of a joke, because the person who will, today we have a system where you've got 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans and you have to get 70% of those 6 people. I'm not sure how that works out in percentages, but you get a half a person or whatever. But You have to have somebody from both parties come to an agreement, which guarantees a certain bipartisan consensus on this. However, in the system proposed by Clean Missouri, you have the state auditor, who is an elected official, a partisan elected official, who happens right now to be a Democrat. The people who are backing this, among other things, happen to be unions and Democrats. So there's a partisan aspect to this nonpartisan demographer that I'm a little skeptical of.
What about, Jason, some of these other things? Amendment 1 limits campaign contributions, gifts from lobbyists, open state records to public review. Are these all good things?
I think so. I think that the legislature hasn't been able to pass these for years. So now the initiative petition came in, and I think most people would support those issues. The public will support those for sure. And I think that probably is what could get Clean Missouri over the finish line with regards to the redistricting.
Right, and I agree with that. I think that the reality is you're not going to get politics out of the demography. People are going to be motivated by money and politics, and so it's going to happen. And I don't think there's a problem with people of color being elected in the state of Missouri. It's happening, and I'm not sure where that problem is.
Well, and actually, in the current system, one of the ways Republicans have maintained their hold on the demography is to maintain majority-minority districts with large majorities in the majority-minority districts. Yeah. So to preserve that, they've made other seats less competitive for the Democrats.
Let's go quickly on some other issues on the ballot for Missourians next Tuesday. 3 plans for medical marijuana without going into details about each one. Should one of them or any of them be adopted?
I think they all, well, I don't know about all of them, but I think one of them will pass at least. I think we're moving forward on medical marijuana.
Right. I think one will pass. I think one will pass.
All right. There's a minimum wage increase to $12 hourly by 2023. Think that'll pass?
Well, I think, given the public sentiment, yeah, that will pass.
Maybe the most important item on the ballot is a library tax.
It is.
So I'm told, you think it has any chance?
Very small tax with a very, very big promise to the voters about what we can accomplish with it, and we think we're grateful to the Star for their endorsement and the Independence Examiner. And yes, it will pass.
And Gwen, gasoline tax hike, 10 cents a gallon by 4 years.
I hope it will pass. I think it. I think it will. I hope it will pass.
Jason?
Probably one of the most important things on the ballot.
Yes.
We've done nothing for infrastructure and roads in Missouri for gosh knows how long.
And there's not been much criticism, if any.
No, except the money flows through the Highway Patrol. I still don't understand that. I finally read the ballot language, and this is one of the weirdest ballot languages I've ever seen. There's also money set aside for congestion. They don't really define congestion. There's just a large pot of money.
It's a nasal condition.
Yeah, I'm probably going to end up voting for it, but I want to say they're doing this to us again. It flows through the Highway Patrol. How is that?
Well, actually, the Highway Patrol the Highway Patrol gets a percentage of the funding,
right.
And the local municipalities get funding to take care of local
right.
roads and bridges,
right.
And then MoDOT formally. Currently in the budget, the Highway Patrol is in the MoDOT budget. So the tax
why
money.
Doesn't it just go to MoDOT? And they can fund the Highway Patrol.
Well, so it's going to go.
So
it's going to go to MoDOT.
We have no more time to discuss this. Okay, because Star columnist Steve Rose is scheduled to be on the Ruckus panel next week, and because I've spent so much time talking about his campaign columns, it seems appropriate to discuss his most recent contribution, Predictions of Election Victories. We call it Viewing the Election Through Rose-Colored Glasses. Although he identifies as a Republican, Rose often finds fault with the GOP, and that has been especially true this year. And in the races he predicts, the winners are all Democrats, starting with the Kansas governor's race. So, Ron, is Steve Wright, Laura Kelly about to become governor of Kansas?
I don't think so. I think, again, you have an election environment where the president has an influence, but you also have Chris Kobach, who's a very strong candidate, who's very clear about his message and where he stands, and he's got a great base of support. So I think that's an early call, and I think maybe that's Rose's wish list.
Why do you think the polls are so close if Kobach has this following that you're discussing?
Well, I do. I think because of the environment, you have an election environment that's very favorable to Democrat challengers in every race, and it's a national trend. But because, again, you have that base of support, and I think that's why you're going to see Chris Kobach win this thing. I think you also look at it where in 2016 Donald Trump was going to lose, but he didn't. So.
Are you confident that Kelly's going to be the next governor?
So I don't know for sure. I think anybody who says they know for sure is probably ahead on
panelist
medical
on
Rutgers. I think this depends on the Greg Orman vote.
Yeah.
If Orman's over 10%, then Chris Kobach wins. If he's between 7 and 10, I have no idea what happens. If he's under 7, then Laura Kelly wins.
The Orman vote may skew what would have been the results otherwise.
I think if this were a direct heads-up deal, I think that what's happened in Kansas over the and not the way I'm going, but it's based on false information in a lot of cases. But I think Laura Kelly would win a heads-up against Chris Kobach at this point. But it's not a heads-up because of Greg Orman, so Chris may sneak through.
Does this suggest there's not a great appetite for independent candidates, although we hear people from time to time say we need independents in the race?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on that. I have not seen any case here where an independent candidate runs strongly, and that's just disappointing that Orman would, insert himself in this race when he says he's looking out for the best interests of Kansas. He needs to stand down.
Well, and
he already ran before too.
Yeah, for the U.S.
Right, and yeah.
There's no platform. There's no real platform there.
Well, he talks about economic development. That
Right,
he says is his goal.
I mean, is there anybody
Jobs
against
on
economic development?
How about this interesting 2nd district race we usually don't talk about? We have a Republican named Steve Watkins running against Democrat Paul Davis, who had been in the Kansas legislature, ran for governor against Brownback 4 years ago. How do you think that might turn out?
Probably a Democrat win from everything I'm seeing and hearing. And,
Latest poll.
the Republicans, a lot of them don't support his opponent. And I feel like his name ID is high from this gubernatorial race. And with the tide coming, I feel like he's probably has a better shot of winning than Kelly does.
And if Davids wins the 3rd district, you're going to have 2 of the 4 House districts in the state of Kansas with Democratic representatives.
When's the last time that happened?
So, Ron, if that were to occur and have both Republicans and Democrats in the Kansas delegation, is that good or bad for the state in terms of influence with the White House and the administration?
I think in terms of the White House, it's going to be a negative. I think because they're going to be opposed to the White House. I think the other factor is going to be what happens in Congress. If you've got a Republican majority, then having Democrats represent you doesn't help you. But again, if you have
Democrat majority, I heard some commentary this morning that Trump would probably actually prefer a Democratic Congress so he can run against that Congress.
The question is, will Sharice vote for Nancy Pelosi?
Yeah.
And who knows? She won't say.
Right. Let me go quickly around, just give me the answer, one word. McCaskill or Hawley?
McCaskill's going to win.
McCaskill.
It's going to be close.
Hawley.
Of course.
It's a split decision. What would you expect? All right, we're going to head for the soapbox now for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes have 30 seconds each to ameliorate, advocate, or consecrate. And we'll begin with Jason.
I want to toast the local media, Kansas City Star, Kansas City Business Journal, Fox 4, KCBT for their coverage of the election cycle. I know they have salacious headlines. They have clickbait a lot of the time, and that frustrates all of us. But I think as far as the Star and other outlets, I think they've done a pretty good job this year of reaching out to voters and actually talking about some of the issues through the influencer series at the Star and through what KCP does and through the debate we had with Yoder and Davids. Like, that didn't happen without the local media bringing it to our attention. So toast the Star and all the local media.
Ron?
Well, I would like to roast the Star and the rest of the local media. And I think in the big picture, with Sharice Davids in particular, they haven't vetted the candidate. Nobody knows where she stands, and yet they put her out there. And you got Kevin Yoder, who's done an excellent job representing the 3rd District, and that should have been part of this race.
Find out right after Ruckus when the debate is on, Gwen.
I've got to roast President Trump for his all-out assault on immigrants and his reckless and irresponsible assertion that he has the authority to change the Constitution by executive order fiat. It's totally ridiculous. In addition to his ongoing negative attacks and hate speech, fear-mongering. His behavior flies in the face of the democracy of this nation and the bedrock of truth, justice, and equality on which this nation was formed.
Mr. Kemper?
So I'd like to praise two institutions and their leaders that 10 or 15 years ago were in deep trouble, but today are great success stories. Union Station and Liberty Memorial, the World War I Museum, George Costello and Matt Naylor, and particularly Matt, now that we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. Two great success stories, two great leaders.
And finally, here is a toast to Ruckett colleague Gwen Grant, who is appearing nationwide on Spectrum Cable as part of its digital programming promotion.
Spectrum is investing in the community, both locally and nationally, and that's very important to us.
Gwen's smooth performance is due in part, we like to think, to her many appearances on Ruckus. And Gwen's next move? Maybe Dancing with the Stars. And that is Ruckus for this week. We're back next Thursday at 7. Now for the Ruckettes and the crew, Mike Shannon saying thanks very much for watching and good night.
Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by gifts from Dave and Jamie Cummings, the Hartwig family, Barbara and Peter Gattermeyer, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.